Uh, Good afternoon. My name is Justin Bamberg. I'm an attorney here in Orangeburg with Lanier and Burroughs. And I stand before you today just to provide a brief update. As you are aware, I represent an individual who on June the 12th was sexually assaulted in her home by an Orangeburg County Sheriff's deputy while he was on duty responding to a call for service. You may remember that there was a domestic disturbance in the home for which the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office was called. Upon arrival, a supervising officer took the victim's boyfriend outside while a new to the department uncertified officer remained inside with my client. He then proceeded to threaten to arrest her boyfriend if she did not perform a sex act on him, at which point he did actually step outside and place the boyfriend into the back of the patrol car and re-entered the residence where a sexual act did in fact occur. Earlier today, this officer, who we now know as Officer Derek Johnson, was arrested and charged with felony misconduct in office. It's my understanding that these charges do carry a sentence ranging between 3 months and 10 years. My client has been struggling day to day to recover from the traumatic experience that she had at the hands of this officer, and we will continue seeking justice. There is a bit of joy for my client today because, as we know, in incidences such as this where there are alleged sexual assaults, many victims do not step forward, and many of those who do are not believed, and that is very traumatic. And in fact, it's our position that that is what happened in this situation early on. What we know, according to the affidavits and warrants that have been issued in this case, is that former Deputy Johnson has admitted that a sex act did take place. That is wholly inappropriate. That is an abuse of power, and we will, while we celebrate to an extent today, today's also a painful day because we do not expect this of our officers. It's unsettling for me personally. As many of you know, my office is here in Orangeburg County. I grew up in Bamberg County, and in fact, my mother is currently an employee with the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office. Again, 99% of officers are amazing people. They do their jobs, they do them diligently, and they fight for that which we want them to. They fight for citizens. They are people that citizens can believe in. They restore hope to communities. But there are some bad apples, and today is an example of what happens when bad apples in departments take actions. There are consequences. But what this leads me to is a much larger question than just the actions of this particular officer. We know that he was uncertified. We know that he had only been with the department for, it's my understanding, just a few months. It raises a very, very big question in my mind and in my client's mind, and that question is, what is it that would make this officer feel like it was okay for him to do this while on duty? The average person, you would think that during their first few months of their employment, many people don't even want to take an early lunch break for fear that it may jeopardize their career or jeopardize their employment. This officer felt like it was okay to sexually assault a female victim on a call for service. And there are things that we will continue to look in. We will patiently wait the criminal justice process to run its course, and we are looking forward to a conviction of this officer for misconduct in office, because it sends a very important message that these actions are not okay. There are consequences when you abuse your power of authority. I've said this time and time again that as a law enforcement officer in the United States of America, you are one of the most powerful people on this planet. You have the legal authorization to deprive a citizen of their life, their liberty, and their freedom. And in this instance, this officer deprived my client of her womanhood, of her humanity, degraded her in a fashion that no human being should be degraded in, and we want justice. So with that said, I will entertain any questions that you all may have.
If your client had never contacted the police about this to let them know what was going on, do you believe that this situation would have been swept under the rug or they would have not known about what was taking place?
This incident occurred in the early morning hours on June 12th. Immediately after the officers left the home, my client and her boyfriend did call 911 to report it. Um, you know, it's one of those situations where there's always a question there. You know, had she not called 911, what would have happened? Had she not went on to hire an attorney to give her a voice, what would have happened? We will never know. And thankfully for her, she doesn't have to answer that question because we know that this officer was fired the very next day. We know that he has today been charged with misconduct in office and is facing up to 10 years in prison. And we know that we as a legal team are going to be looking at policies and looking to see how we can prevent this from happening in the future to someone else. You know, I have received information from various sources that things like this have happened before. And we know that many times women do not want to step forward because they feel as though it brings too much attention to them. It feels like they are putting themselves at risk to be harmed once more by people not believing what they say, because many times this is a he said versus she said. But apparently here we have an admission by the defendant, who of course is entitled to the constitutional protections of criminal defendants that everyone is, innocent until proven guilty. But we apparently have an admission that a sex act did take place. But many women, not just here in Orangeburg or in South Carolina, but across the country, are not afforded that opportunity. Their voice is never heard. So I will take a second because it's important for the public to know that you do have rights, and people are not entitled to violate them merely because they are a sworn officer of the law. And if you are done wrong, if you have been sexually assaulted by an officer, if you feel that you have been mistreated, you do not have to hide in the shadows. My client is evidence that you do not have to hide in the shadows. And if we're going to fix this problem and we're going to restore trust in law enforcement, and then we're going to continue to build that bridge that has crumbled between citizens and law enforcement, it takes good officers to step forward and not stand up and defend officers who are doing these terrible acts. It takes citizens to step forward and give yourself a voice, because people will support you.
When you say the officer has admitted that sexual acts took place, is he arguing that it was consensual, or do you know anything? Is he admitting to forcing her, or what is
I am not sure exactly what he has informed SLED, but I do know that he admitted that a sex act took place. I would, of course, presume, given the charge and given the facts that I know to date, his position, as is many officers when they get caught, their position is it was consensual. My position is there is no such thing as consent. When you show up to a call for service and you have a badge, you have a press uniform, and you have a service pistol, and you have the ability to deprive someone of their life, liberty, freedom, to take them to jail, there's no such thing as consent. We saw this in Georgia in approximately 2004. Officers were getting charged with performing sex acts while on duty in their official capacity as an officer. And many times they were getting off on charges because it's usually only the officer and the victim. And it's he said versus she said. And what Georgia did, and what I will be looking to do in my capacity as a state legislature, is file legislation that ends that. And what Georgia did is they filed a law that is in effect now that says that it is its own specific crime if you engage in a sexual act while on duty. That ends the he said versus she said. It stops victimizing victims that have already been victimized before. And that is something that I do plan on moving forward with once I conduct the necessary research into the criminal statutes here in South Carolina.
Is this a race-related issue? I know you don't want to give away too much about your client, but is this a race-related issue?
No, I have no information that would lead me to believe that this is a race-related issue.
Justin, you had mentioned in a prior interview that she had contemplated suicide. She was so devastated with this. How is she doing with her mental health today?
Thankfully, She was able to obtain some mental health treatment. She did attend CASA Family Systems for some counseling, and she was referred for some additional mental health treatment. She was given prescription medication to help her deal with all of the emotions that she has been having. So she is doing much better. And I can tell you, after the news today, it feels like the weight of the world has been lifted off her shoulders, because you can imagine to get put through this and then to feel as though no one believes you. Well, now we know that we can believe her. But she still has a long road to go. This is something that, and her daughter was in the house, this is something that she is going to have to deal with the rest of her life. And at some point in time, she will have to sit her daughter down, who is currently a minor, and explain to her, this is what happened to mommy. And don't ever let this happen to you. And how, as a mother, you deal with that situation, I don't know, outside of faith and family support and a deep belief that you can get through your most trying times.
You mentioned a minute ago that this isn't the first time this has happened. Were you just speaking in general terms, or were you talking about specifically the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office?
I have received some information that there has been some inappropriate sexual activity in the past with officers, be it on duty or off duty with the department. But it's also something that happens statewide. It happens countrywide. We saw this in Oklahoma, where there was an officer with the department who systematically preyed on minority women. He preyed on women who had extensive criminal backgrounds or who had drug problems, none of which my client has. But he preyed on them because those in society are voices that people often do not believe, and they question what they say. So we see this happens all across the country. Recently, in 2015, the Associated Press did a very in-depth national study on sexual misconduct by officers. But I will be following up on all leads that I get, because again, this is not an attack on the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office. This is not an attack or criticism of the officers that do their job every day. Again, I have known many of these people my entire life, and it is very difficult for me to stand before you today and talk about this. But there are bad apples that don't need to have a badge or a uniform. And if there are individuals who cover for these officers that do bad things like this, they are part of the problem and they are not part of the solution. So we're going to be looking into everything, and no stone will be left unturned.
How will the Sheriff's Department as a whole be held responsible for this?
We, of course, would be looking into very obvious claims of Section 1983 civil rights violations on behalf of my client. You know, what we want to see, we have to look at policies and procedures. So you often focus on the actions of the individual officer, but there is a very, very big question here, and that question is this: what is it that would lead a new, uncertified deputy who is working to solidify his place with the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office? What would lead him to think that doing something like this while on duty with his field training officer feet away outside, what would make him think that is okay? And these are questions that I will work to get answers to.
So your ultimate goal is to have the Sheriff's Office, of course, bringing your client justice, but to also have the Sheriff's Office to kind of look at their policies and look at some of the things they handle in certain situations?
Yes, you know, part of this is, of course, justice for my client. She needs justice, and we will not stop until we get her justice. But there are other things, and I've talked about some of this before, and it goes all the way up to looking at the procedure for certification through the Criminal Justice Academy. We know that you don't have to be certified to work as a sworn officer and be bestowed all the powers that officers have in this state. You can actually be uncertified and work for 1 year with one requirement, that you get certified during the course of that year and that you be certified to use your firearm. That, I think, is something that we need to look at from a public policy perspective, because many of these new guys, they're still in a vetting process. You need to be able to analyze their character. You need to analyze whether or not they're a good fit for your department, and whether or not they possess the traits needed for law enforcement officers. The other thing is, why was this uncertified new officer left alone inside the house with someone who, when the call was made, is the alleged perpetrator, so to speak? And even after her boyfriend, who was at the time the quote-unquote victim, is placed in the patrol car, why was he inside alone? When you now have one person who's isolated in the car, and you're the training officer, you can't train, you can't critique or evaluate someone if you can't see them. So these are things that have to be looked at, not just in this department, but statewide. Thank y'all so very much.